Time Again, Exposing the Truth. Welcome to Coffee Time Again, Exposing the Truth. Dale at the microphone, the show that demonstrates how history repeats itself. He digs into the past, shows what happens, and how it is happening now. Follow the path of history to where it goes, then relate it to today to reveal the connections. The culture that forgets its history has no future. A history buff and loves to talk about it, going back as far as ancient Greeks and Egyptians and beyond. So grab your coffee, your chair, and listen to the show. Hope you enjoy.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, because it definitely is morning where I am right now, 7 a.m. I've got Darrell McClain here with his story of his life and what's going on and what changed him and how he changed. My name is Dale, of course, and I am the host of Coffee Time Again, Exposing the Truth. And we're going to be exposing some truth from Darrell this morning. So let's get started right away and see what Darrell has to say. So go for it, Darrell, and introduce yourself.
Good morning. Good morning. So my name is Darrell McClain. As Dale said, I'm the host of a podcast called The Darrell McClain Show. I record out of Nova, Virginia, currently in Norfolk, Virginia. I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, in during the 1986, and grew up there in the 80s and the 90s. Joined the Navy. Did a little bit of college wrestling. Was an alternate for the All Navy wrestling team. And around the time where, let's say when I was in the military, I was highly political, but you meet people from all sorts of different various backgrounds. It doesn't really matter if you guys get along, but there's a mission, so that becomes the focus. And essentially, you start to have a lot of conversations about politics, about society, about economics, about culture. And you start to have a bunch of friends, different friends from all different walks of life that you would never, meet if you weren't in the military, And that includes if you have the opportunity, like I did, to leave the country on several occasions. I went to South Korea, went to Bahrain, been to Brazil, and so you see, we're more alike than we're separate. So when I got out of the Navy, I had started to somewhat back away from politics, and it was funny because then that seemed to be when everybody else got super focused on politics. I said, well, it seems like society and culture just missed me, but I was somewhat troubled by the conversations, not the conversations that were being had, but the coarseness in the way that they were being conducted. Are people losing friendships over, who you're going to vote for, and this type of thing? And I would say, cross class, race, culture, etc. People's minds are actually made up by relationships they have, by conversations they have with people who disagree, especially if those conversations come from an open and honest place with somebody you actually care about. So if somebody, my friend, we've been friends when we were kids, and have a differing opinion to me, that's not a reason to cut off a friendship. That's actually probably a reason to kind of dig into them and see why they believe the way they believe, or why I believe the way I believe. If there's a middle ground somewhere, if there's just, it may not be a subject where there's a middle ground, but at least I can understand why somebody thinks the way they think. And so during the election, when it was Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and Donald Trump that year, he was going against what I said was every type of Republican he could go against. It was like 17 candidates at that time. And the Democrats at that time, it was like 5 of them. And I was shocked by the thinness of the Democratic, party field. And I said, well, it looks like they're kind of trying to have a coronation going on here. And what I was looking at when I looked at the exit polling and all this stuff is people were very interested in Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And the Democrats kind of tried to coronate Hillary Clinton, and they got exactly what they were going to get.
And they got what they asked for.
Yeah, and then everything from Donna Brazile coming out with her book and saying that the DNC did rig the process and prop Hillary Clinton up. And I say, if you just would have given people in your party, your base, the actual choice of the person that they wanted and let them have it out, you would have probably had a healthier party and a healthier conversation about what the country wants to look like. And so even from that perspective, I could see the disconnect from what I saw versus what people I uh, loved and cared about saw. And so it was just, how do I keep the conversation going while one side of the country's having a meltdown and the other side of the country is extremely thrilled, And
Yeah,
it was just this realization that every time a president or your local politician, etc., goes up and down on the polls, you can't act as if all of a sudden everybody's oppressed, and these really bad analogies and everybody's fainting and crying all over the place, and so it was just, that's what made me start the podcast. Actually started it during the that election season, and so it'll be 4 years old actually next month.
yeah.
So
That's about, I started mine in August of 2020, about 4 years ago.
oh yeah, nice.
So you've seen a lot of it and you've been involved in a lot of politics.
Yeah, so it was actually fairly interesting because I feel like every time when it came my time to vote, it was the significant time to vote. So I had a teacher that got me registered to vote, and it was this second election of George W. Bush versus John Kerry. So they
Yeah.
were very adamant in Florida. The narrative in Florida was, our vote really matters here. The election was decided by about 500 votes in Florida. So they,
Mhm.
they were pushing, everybody to vote. And my teacher, to her credit, she wanted all her students who were coming of age at 18 to get registered. And so she pushed us to get registered to vote. But the thing is, we didn't really have the knowledge of, what it meant, who we were going to vote for,
Yeah.
etc. And so I would listen. I would always listen to a lot of talk radio, and that's kind of where I would formulate my opinions. It was kind of a realization then when I told my teacher who I planned to vote for. She was horrified.
Yeah.
She was a Jewish liberal woman uh,
Oh,
by the name of Rosalind Hoffman. So of course she wanted to vote for John Kerry, and
yeah.
I was going to vote for George Bush. And so what I loved about her, she didn't try to convince me at all. She had the class divided up, and we just did mock debates on who we were planning to vote for and what were the issues. And that's when I started to realize, like, oh, that's kind of the way you do it. You let people figure out what their values are, what candidate holds close to your values, and she didn't castigate us for having an opinion different than hers. But and it was interesting to hear even then some of the talking points that they had that I thought were wrong, and some of the stuff that I had that they thought were wrong. And it was very simple. So even so when I went to vote that year, I had more knowledge than I had going in because I just used to listen to Rush Limbaugh and Neil Bortz, and Bill O'Reilly was on that station, and
Yeah.
Sean Hannity, and then we used to have a shock jock by the name of Bubba the Love Sponge, and that's kind of all I listened to. And so the whoever was doing liberal talk radio or whatever, they just weren't on a station that I listened to. So
No.
I never knew any of those opinions existed until I started to,
Well, the liberals don't have any real talk shows.
yeah.
Uh, People like Hannity and the late Rush Limbaugh and all that, they just don't have it. And they've tried. The last one who was Alan Combs, and he was with Fox for a while, and then he went off, and then he was again, but he did a liberal talk show, and unfortunately, it's a good show. I watched it. I'm not a liberal by any stretch of the imagination, but I watched Alan, but Alan died, and I
Yeah.
did the talk show.
See, I didn't listen to Alan Combs' talk show, but I used to watch him on Hannity and Combs.
Yeah,
I used to see, kind of their back and forth. And I kind of wish, even though now, they say you can kind of find that anywhere on TV, I'm not sure if you actually can, and not in a long form discussion format on each issue. And
no,
they're very important topics that Americans care about, and you get five people on a debate panel, and they get the most fiery people talking about the most important topics in a 30-second soundbite, and it's
yeah.
like you cannot figure out public policy in that man.
No, you need to have, what they typically call nowadays town hall meetings, which
Mhm.
is what I think is a good idea, because that gets the public to ask questions of the candidate.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I noticed about both Bernie Sanders on the hard left and Donald Trump on the hard right is they have no problem sitting down for town halls and answering questions in long form. They have no problem talking to people who disagree with them. You may not like the answers, but
Yeah,
one thing you can say about both of those individuals is you believe they're giving you the answer
yeah, they're giving you the straight deal, especially Trump.
And so, and I realized when I saw there was a lot of overlap where the people would say, well, I was going to vote for Sanders, I was going to vote for Trump. And then you're sitting in the back and you're doing your scratch because their economic policies are so different. So you
Mhm.
start to think, what did they have in common that we draw people to them? And it was the straight talk and the fact that they had a very clear critique of the system
Yes,
and and that the system, Trump would say the system is rigged, and it's like, oh, well, that's what Bernie Sanders says all the time. It's rigged, and now he blames the millionaires and the billionaires, and
Mhm.
Trump will say, he doesn't necessarily call people out by name or by systems, but he'll say it's a swamp,
Yeah,
and
that's
we got to
true.
drain the swamp. And I
Well,
say, well, if there's and they say, and then years later, you have candidates like Vivek Ramaswamy, who kind of has that same sentiment. They call it the admin state, and I
yeah,
say so. I look at that and I say people are somewhat saying the same thing. They may have different solutions, but if you have this large of a majority of Americans who don't think the system is working for them, we ought to start listening. And I think the thing that I was trying to avoid when I came up with my show is I felt like people weren't listening to each other. They were listening just enough to be able to scream at each other.
you're right, and I agree with that 100%. And the thing is, with the swamp, they're going after the wrong people in the swamp.
Yeah.
The right people are the bureaucrats, the career bureaucrats. It goes through
Mm.
they work through each administration when they change, because there's no way to get rid of them. And and I say this because my son works for the Commerce Department,
Mm.
and there's no way he can be fired.
Yeah. I was having a discussion with another gentleman um, who's constitutional scholar. He was actually on my last podcast, and we were kind of having the same discussion about the massive bureaucracy in the United States. And during COVID time, people had a lot of time to sit and study. And there's all these organizations that people didn't know even existed, the Department of this, that, and the other. So we
Yeah,
jokingly call it, when I was in, federal law enforcement, we used to call it the alphabet police. So you know about it on a
yeah,
law enforcement standpoint, you know about the CIA and the FBI and the NSA and TSA and all that
yeah.
stuff and DEA and you the ATF. You know the law enforcement ones, but you don't think about all those other organizations that it seems like,
Cool.
in my opinion, the legislatures don't want to legislate, so they put everything out into a committee. They come
Hmm.
up with some department of whatever, and you
Yep.
find out about it when you're fishing in the wrong part of town. And they
Right,
say,
absolutely correct.
it,
You'd be surprised how many departments I have found in so many different heads. There's a school, Department of Education, TSA. I mean, I think there's 22 or 23 cabinet positions.
mm,
And there's about 20 of them we can get rid of.
yeah. And I think that's kind of, I think one thing happens that's somewhat funny is those people aren't, they're obviously not going to vote to fire themselves.
No,
So they have a natural, all pretty much always voter block. So whoever's
mhm,
trying to scale back,
yeah,
scale down government, you're not going to get their vote. They're not going to vote for you to stop them from having so much unaccountable power, unchecked
right,
power.
because,
It,
they issue a regulation, EPA, for example, will issue a regulation that has the power of law, and that's wrong, in my opinion.
and I think that, like I said, I think that happens so much because the people who were elected as the representatives of the state to write the laws, they just seem like they're uninterested in actually legislating. They don't want to put their names on anything because they don't
No,
want to have to do with the blowback.
and that goes back to state level too, as well as federal level.
Yeah,
I noticed that here in Colorado, that they don't want, they keep passing the buck, as it
yeah.
were.
Yeah, and so what I was somewhat interested in, at least in what the little thing that I could do, was I would notice that you would have Americans when it came to pure public policy, they'd agree on 60, this thing 62%, this thing 64%, this thing is 70%. And
Mm,
you could see, well, Americans have been on agreement on these things for years. Why hasn't
yeah,
it got done? And then you look after administration that passes by, and it seems like we're having the same conversation generation after generation. And you're like, well, when are you guys going to do something about it? And
right.
the answer is basically never. Uh, we're going to keep you distracted with all the social things because that's what you guys will fight over. But the partially that's on the plate, but you never get to that steak sitting right there. And
No, you don't. And the other thing is, we could get, I had interviewed a gentleman, well, just a few days ago, and his idea was to end all re-elections.
mm,
One term is maybe 5 or 6 years, with one term to do what you came to Washington to do, then you're out. You can't run again for 2 years for a different position. You can't go back to where you was. So if you
yeah,
ran for the Senate, you serve your 6 years, you're out of the Senate, that's forever.
yeah. I think that there should definitely be term limits on those positions because I used to, when I got to start thinking about government, who was powerful, how it was set up, I just thought it was fascinating. And then I'm dealing with knowledge of what people know and what they don't know. And not everybody's a political, not everybody sits around all year long and pays attention to what's going on in politics. The largest voting bloc is actually people who don't vote,
Right.
who have no interest, in voting at all. And so you think you get a president, the president gets 8 years. Most people, when they're at their best, can figure out who the president is. A lot of people don't know who the vice president is. But then you go ask them, who's your state senator? They have no idea. Who's your congressman? They have no idea. Who is the senator? No idea. Who's your alderman? No idea. Who's your mayor? No idea. Who's your
Yep.
governor? Some people may know the governor. And so it's just like you vote in all the national elections when the president probably has very little to do with your locally,
Right.
what happened at you at a state level, and you are powerless because you don't participate in the process when it comes to what actually is going to affect you on the state and the local level. And I was just kind of flabbergasted by that, and I thought, and a lot of these people, they sit in power longer than the president. They sit in power about as long as most federal judges. And
Yep.
the policies that they pass and most people don't agree with, but they don't do anything to get them out. You
No.
know, a
Well,
lot I see a lot of people will run unopposed.
yeah, studies have shown that every congressman is corrupt except yours.
Yeah.
And that's when they keep getting reelected, and senators, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's one thing that I remember they used to say they have Congress and the Senate had very low approval ratings, but people loved their personal senator.
Right.
And, and but then people from the other states would say, "Oh, that's Susan Collins," or "Oh, that Kristen Sinema did this," and it's kind of funny. And say, "Yeah," and what's the name of your representative? They're
Yeah.
not in the they keep their head low, stay out of the press. They're bought out by corporations, and so
Hmm.
you have no idea what they're doing behind your back. You don't write them any letters to push
No,
them to do anything. You don't
don't
go
call
to the
them, you don't
town
write to
meeting.
them. You
Yeah,
don't go to their news conferences and when they hold them outside, and stuff. It's just really, sitting here thinking, I forgot the name of my senator, state senator.
yeah. And my thing is, I tried to look it up randomly because, when there was one time where I actually had a problem in the state of Virginia with a Commonwealth, and I was pleased that I wrote Senator Tim Kaine, I wrote Mark Warner, I wrote President Trump at the time, and I got a response from all of them.
All right.
In a letter format. This goes to this department, and I fixed everything, put the correspondence from the two Democratic senators and the President of the United States. I sent it off to the Department of Veterans Affairs, and there was a lot of big names on there, and it got resolved. And I thought, how
Good.
many people know that you can actually write a letter to the President of the United States, and you
Yeah.
write it in, and you're gonna get a response, you
Well, I
know.
don't know if you can get a response, but obviously you did. And I'm sure
Well,
that
they didn't. They were,
some of them are
because
going to
they just
forward.
like the president. The White House still has that switchboard phone number where you can call and
Yep.
leave a complaint. The
Yep.
president's not going to pick up the phone, but
No.
it's a matter of the public record.
Yeah,
You
it
know.
is. And you can call your senator, your representatives, you can write to them, you can email them. You got to look around to find their email address, but you can do that. There are a lot
Yeah,
of ways to contact it. And I think more people need to be contacting their representatives when something's wrong,
yeah, and I
or even
think
if something's right.
yeah, and I think the problem is just for me taking a charitable view of why it seems like everything is so corrupting. And I think it's because and this is the politicians, only talk to the people who give them the money.
That's right.
And so it's what starts to happen is there's an overrepresentation in those rooms, you know, because most of us we have to go to work. We have daily lives to live. So if you have a massive amount of people who don't vote. So the politician's not interested in you. Now,
No,
one, you don't send them money. Two, you're not even voting, so they're not interested. And then another part of the population who does vote, but you don't send them any money, and you don't write them any letters, you don't talk to them. And then the only people they see are the people that send them money and talk to them all the time. You can see why it's tilted in such the wrong direction, because they're not talking to the everyday person. You
no,
know,
they're not. And they need to be talking to us out on the streets.
yeah. And I talked to a guy who has an idea. Um, we're still in the process of recording, but it's like the state's Bill of Rights or something like that. I forgot what he called it. And I don't agree with all of his principles, but it's basically it would relocalize, the government in the way that he says that's what the founders thought it was supposed to be when the country was founded.
Because I, sta-
And
I did a podcast with a gentleman who had a great idea and it would work on getting the money out of politics,
mm, yeah, well, I'm
starting
I'm
at the
interested.
local level.
I'm interested in that because I have kind of two sets of books on it, because I think that, so Mitt Romney, when he ran for president, I remember when he made the statement, corporations are people, and the left went crazy and said, oh no, corporations are people, and da, da, da. And that's when they talked about the Supreme Court and the personhood amendments and all this type of stuff. And and so the conversation delved into, is money speech? And if money is speech, then that means that when I give my money to a business, then I'm saying something. I'm saying I appreciate this business, I support this business, etc.
Mhm.
And when I give my money to a politician, I'm somewhat saying the same thing.
Right,
And so I just took that at face value. I said, well, if Mitt Romney at that time, who was the representative for the Republican Party, says money is speech, he's not the only one that thinks that, and
right.
he's got a lot of money, and
Yes, he
so
does.
and so that made me start to think, well, if money is speech, and CNBC is correct that 62% of Americans live from paycheck to paycheck, that means a lot of us don't really have a room to do a lot of speaking.
No,
you know, and so it went back right to and that means the people with all the money get to do a lot more speech, and that may be why things look like they look. Because I do think, when you think about how much taxes each individual citizen is paying, I should be able to speak a lot more. I'm getting taxed on property that I already owned.
yeah,
If I'm rich, I got taxed all the way through. I then get taxed when I die. My kids get taxed when they pull from the estate. I get
yeah.
luxury tax on every item that I buy, and I pay property tax every year, even though I own all this land. So, at what point do I
And
get to speak? You know?
that's one of the organizations that needs to be revamped. This is dissolved and rebuilt, and that's the IRS.
Yeah. The thing is, I looked at, taxes and everything that, and what fascinated me is that when I was looking through a lot of the taxes, especially I think it was income taxes, and it was never supposed to be a permanent thing. It was
No,
never supposed to be permanent. It was supposed to be around 7%. It was only supposed to affect the rich, and look at what happened.
it still is only supposed to affect the rich when they raise it to 90% from
Yeah.
7. Yeah, that was in 1913, and that was thanks to President Woodrow Wilson, probably
Mm.
our worst president ever.
Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, he done a lot of nasty. He resegregated the government.
Mm.
It was totally unsegregated. It was totally uh, minorities, blacks, and the others were serving all over the government, including the military. And he said, "Get out." There's a racist. He's a misogynist. He's a what's that one against these? Only he was Catholic, and everybody was Catholic, or you were nothing.
Yeah.
Can't think of the term for that, but the man was just, he gave us the income tax, he gave us the Federal Reserve, which is the worst idea. They fought about that and when they built the government, whether or not to have a federal government and have a federal bank, and they voted against having a federal bank. Even against not George Hamilton, Hamilton. He wanted
Alexander
a federal
Hamilton.
bank. Yeah, Alexander, that's right.
Yeah, that's interesting. I gotta go look that up. When I started to know about the Fed, it was very limited, personally, because this was when I was a Ron Paul supporter, and he just used to always yell about auditing the Fed, and everybody would just act like he was crazy,
Mhm.
you know. And he's a libertarian, and so he caucuses with the Republicans, but he would always question, the Fed and monetary policy, and
Yeah,
I always thought he was very educated, but it was just one of those things where I started to say the Federal Reserve had gotten so big that it just wasn't going to happen.
no. And our government originally was supposed to be kept small. We had a strong federal government, but it wasn't supposed to be as big as it is. And it just kept growing exponentially. And we were warned by George Washington about the two-party system. He warned us several times in various speeches that watch out for parties because they're going to get you in trouble. And you can see
Mhm.
why the threat is to this day.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to American civics, we would really be well served if we went back and read Washington and read Jefferson and read Hamilton and
Yes,
read John Adams and read Franklin
and the
and read
Federalist
the
Papers.
Federalist Papers and understand the fact and Madison, that these people, when they came to the formulation of this republic, they had intense debates on what it was and what it was not supposed to
Yes, they
be.
did.
and especially there was a really good special, if people are more visual learners, of John Adams done a few years ago on HBO, and it's a series, and
Yeah,
it was really well done,
I
and
did
you
see
start to see that, like, they had a lot of conversations they were trying to have. Thomas Paine is out here writing Rights of a Man and all the, all this stuff, and they're reading that stuff, and the founders really had to debate what they wanted this thing to be and what they wanted to look like. And when they came up with the republic, it was somewhat Benjamin Franklin's idea to somewhat have a centralized power and a federal power, and I think a lot of it is lost because those men were educated, and unfortunately, a lot of us are not.
Yeah,
And so you may hear idea from a politician that you admire, and you think that's the solution. And the truth of life is there are no solutions. There are trade-offs.
yeah,
you know.
you're right. What's the trade-off going to be?
Yeah, and that's what you have to wrestle with. The second I think I'm making this right over here, I could be making five things wrong over there.
Right.
And that's when you get into the real debate around, public policy. And I
And
don't
the,
And so
um,
I think obviously that goes back to education. I think we have to go back to having just pure civics courses about what American government is.
we need to
And
have that studied in grade school.
yeah, and
Go
who the
back to
who
teaching school. It's what
yeah,
we need, not teaching
yeah.
basket weaving as a figure of speech.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I ain't paying any attention to that.
But yeah, so but yeah, and I think because those conversations are helpful, because it seems like, at least when I think about what I have viewed just in my little short life, there's always the country's always kind of pushing back and forth,
Mhm.
and always
Yeah,
arguing over the last revolution fought,
right.
and a lot of the times now, the revolutions that we fight over are, the last one that just happened, the big one was the Supreme Court. They gutted Roe v. Wade. And from
Mhm.
my side of the argument, I was fine. I was happy with it, because I look at it from a Calvinist Christian perspective. So I was like, oh, cool. I didn't think that this was legitimate anyway. I'm not interested in, the abortion thing. I don't think people should just be killing their children in mass. So I didn't, but I saw there was the galvanization of that issue, and I just thought, well, now there's going to be this heavy trying to push it right back, you know. And so in about 20 years, we're going to be refighting that battle all over again.
Yeah, the thing
You
is with Roe versus Wade, all the Supreme Court did was send it back to the states for them to decide. They didn't
Mhm.
abolish abortion, which I thought was wrong because I am 100% against them for several reasons. But the point being, they didn't change that. All they did was send it back to the states, and everybody said, "Well, they're abolishing what they're doing," and they had it so wrong, and they still have it wrong.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to somewhat what I said before, was there's a lot of Republicans who made a lot of fancy speeches over
Yeah,
the course of several years because they were safe to make those speeches because they felt like they would never have to write the policy. You know,
right.
and then when the Supreme Court upended it, now it's like, do you actually have a policy for it? And I don't think they had actually thought about it. They
Of
thought,
course not.
and I know people don't like the fusing of religion and politics. And I told my friend, he has a podcast called Over Opinionated, and I said they weren't in the churches like we were, formulating that life begins because God knew you in the womb. So they didn't have those arguments. They
No.
they were they were kind of stuck with the legal justification and when does life begin and all the. And I said I just was not interested in engaging with that at all. you know.
I am a Christian. Actually, I'm a Episcopalian, but the point is still
Oh, man.
a question. But that has to do with part of me being against abortion. The fact that my wife, without my knowledge, had one.
Mm,
When we were married, is just absolutely
crushing.
set me over the edge. Which is the reason I'm just against murder, which is what it's one of the commandments is thou shalt not commit murder.
Yeah.
I'm against abortion because it's decimating the black population. More blacks will have abortions than anybody else. Poor blacks, and not the rich, and it was set up in place by Margaret Sanger, who set up Planned Parenthood specifically for ethnic cleansing. That's not what she says, that's not what she called it, but when you look at it in depth, that's what it is. Ethnic cleansing. She wanted to get rid of the undesirables, whether you were black or white didn't make any difference. If you were mentally ill, you needed to be culled from the human race. You and your seed had to be gotten rid of because you were insane or you were crazy or you just didn't have the mental capacity. You was, in some ways, you were imperfect. And that's what Margaret Sanger wanted. And it seems to be working even with the new laws against abortion.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people even knew about her, looked up the things that she said, looked up the purposes of the organization, looked at the geographical location of where they're normally located, and did the thinking of, what's going on here, and you don't think about it until you're faced with the situation, and then you have to sit there and live in your sin and your shame. If you would have had more information and more knowledge, you probably would have made different choices.
Yeah, I agree. So it's politics today is not mixed up with religion, but it ought to be.
Well, I think it is, but not in a serious way. So
Okay.
so people will say, "Oh, I'm a person of faith," or something like that. Or everybody says, "Oh, I'm Catholic," or I'm, not a lot of politicians are running saying, "I'm atheist." That
No,
doesn't
they
that
don't, even if it
so
may be.
yeah, and so they kind of know there's like a wink, wink. Yeah, oh yes, we're Christians, and it's like, okay, uh, when was the last time you were actually at somebody's church?
Yeah,
Like what were you doing on last Sunday or the one before, or anyone before you decided to run for public office, and
yeah,
then you start to, well, wait a minute, you're questioning their faith, and
yeah.
there's supposed to not be a fusing of this and that, and
Well,
so
we have
it's
to. We have
and
to know who
it's
we're voting for.
and I just kind of say, well, the trick is, uh, I was never told you have to cut your faith off when you go into a voting booth. So
Mhm.
if that's the ontological approach that I'm taking, that's just what you're gonna have to deal with. I'm not gonna judge you by whatever standards that you created to always give yourself an A plus.
Yeah,
I'm gonna ask certain questions, not just about the abortion issue, but I say we have a homeless epidemic in almost every city. What's your policy towards that? And knowing on the other side of the fence, you're not going to fix the problem. You're not going to fix homelessness, but it should be addressed. You shouldn't act like that it doesn't exist. I shouldn't have to go to Washington D.C. and there's homeless tents everywhere.
in front of the White House.
Yeah,
I,
go to California and you see the same
or
thing. Go to any
Denver,
major city and
come to
it's
Denver.
like, and it say, well, these people don't exist to you because one, they're poor, two, they don't vote, and they're
No,
the degenerates of society. But I thought you were a person of faith. If anything, those should be the people that you're reaching out to the
right.
most. There's the verse in the Bible that says, "Whatever you've done to the least of these, you've done also to me." Like you have pretty much, by your very hatred or flat out ignoring of these people because they don't do anything for you have kind of told me the type of person that I'm going to be dealing with in the White House. Your,
Yeah.
your your preferential treatment of the rich and you're sitting the poor by your footstool is what was not supposed to be done. You know,
Yeah,
and so
my church and I too, but we do a lot. But it's not enough because the homeless is
yeah,
out just even here in Denver. They don't call them homeless anymore in Denver.
mm,
They call them unhoused,
unhoused, yeah,
which I think
as
is
if those
just
little
absolute. That's just ignoring the problem, in my opinion.
yeah, the linguistic approach to changing the definitions of something does not deal with the reality of my situation on the ground. If it's
No,
wintertime and I'm homeless, and you say you're not homeless, you're unhoused, it hasn't changed one situation of where I'm standing and
still
sleeping
winter
and
and
what
I'm still cold.
yeah, you know, it's the that type of silliness that I start to see where I say that type of stuff happens a lot of time with people who don't have power because trust me, when a rich donor has a problem, it's getting fixed.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's getting fixed almost immediately, and they're not playing linguistic games in that way. But I think that there has to be a certain amount of, and there always has been a certain amount of religious pushback back and forth, you know, when it comes to government policy. In the 80s and you had the Jerry Falwells and the moral majority, you know,
mhm,
and they were very effective.
yes,
And
they
I
were.
think Jerry Falwell senior realized, you know, we have to go past politics per se. And so he came up with Liberty University. You
Mhm,
know, you have to be in these the legal halls and stuff like that. And Pat Robertson, you know, he's from Virginia. So when he ran for president, you kind of and he went and founded Regent University, you know, and stuff like that, and Christian Broadcast Network. And, you know, on the left, you know, even though people don't think of him as a leftist, you had Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther King was a Baptist preacher.
yep,
You know, it's got a divinity. And when he was talking about civil rights issues, he always talked about it from a moral perspective. You
yep,
know, and back in those
yep,
days, people at the NAACP and all those organizations, they're all lawyers. They didn't know what he was talking about.
no.
You know, they were looking for ways to manipulate the courts. And he was
Mhm,
saying, no, there's a moral dimension to this thing. And he's quoting, you know, the Old Testament and the wandering in the wilderness and stuff like that.
yeah,
And I think it's crazy because now, if you were to have a certain amount of preachers stand up on the left, they get shouted down
yep.
immediately.
They
You know,
mo The Episcopal Church is a very liberal church.
yeah, I was raised in a division of the Episcopal Church, the AME Church, so
Yeah.
African
Okay,
Methodist
then you're
Episcopal.
familiar with how liberal just, and it's getting worse.
Yes,
Very liberal. But I still love my church, so
and that's always the rub that I kind of because me and Josh from the Over Opinionated show have this conversation, and I just always say, you know, when you fuse religion and politics in such a way, you have to somewhat understand that the politics is going to always try to affect the religion, and the religion is going to always try to affect the politics.
that's
And
right.
so you have to be very careful when you do it because you're supposed to be trying to influence them, not the other way around. And you somewhat have to understand that Caesar will always be Caesar.
Yes.
You know,
Oh,
and
yes.
even in the Bible, well, Caesar had his sycophants and his preachers and his around him that you know
Yep.
told him everything he was doing was okay. And
Yep.
Moses, remember in the Moses comes with the you know you get God says do this and he shows miracles, and
Yeah.
then and Pharaoh says, all right, well these guys over here can do some miracles too, you
Yeah.
know, and they come out and they do all and so I look at that from a biblical and historical perspective and say there will always be a religious type of person whispering in somebody's ear in power. The question is, what are they saying?
You're right.
Are
All right.
are they justifying his worst nature? Are they pushing him to be better, you know.
And it's
And
kind
so
of like
you always,
Obama's preacher. I can't remember his name right now.
the whole thing was, this was the weird thing about Obama, that I said people should have saw what was coming,
Yep,
because when Obama's preacher, who was Dr. Jeremiah Wright,
that.
Obama tossed his preacher to the wayside,
Yeah,
you know. And I said, so Obama sat in Jeremiah Wright's church for years, and
20 years.
the second it got too hot, he chucked his preacher.
Yep,
And I said, so what relationship did you really have with the man? You
yep,
know, if Jeremiah Wright, who, you know, is a staple in Chicago and actually is a Marine veteran who then actually went to school for theology. And if you have a problem with his theology, everybody that's familiar with Jeremiah Wright knows he'll debate you on it. And
yep.
so all he had to do was say, go debate him on the theology. I don't have a degree in that. He threw his pastor under the bus.
That's
And
right.
I said, well, I guess we're in for a rough ride.
Yeah.
Because
I kind of figured that from listening to his speech at the previous convention that we could have problems.
well, see, my thing was, and I wasn't an Obama supporter
No.
because when I was going through, that was my first or second year in the military,
Yeah,
and me and my friends would have the discussions like, this guy spent 125 days in the Senate and he thinks he's going to run the country. And I remember my friend who passed away, you know, God rest his soul, saying, that's like us being at this base 125 days and thinking we can run this place. And
yeah.
we just thought it was absurd. And
Well,
so I saw, you know, when Obama got elected, everybody dancing around and celebrating, and, you know, on the base. And I understood the historical nature of, you know, the event. But
yeah,
then I started to look at, like, are these people gonna hold him accountable? And then I heard people like Al Sharpton say he wasn't. You know, and I was just like, no, wait a minute. Al Sharpton ran for president. Uh, he was trying to hold everybody else accountable all these years. He's a supposed Pentecostal reverend. So now, when your friend gets elected, all of a sudden he's not going to be held accountable. You
yeah.
know,
God,
I thought,
the thing is that scared me about Obama is he went from a state senator to president of the United States in 8 years. How do you do that?
yeah, I was looking up a basically a how it happened type of thing recently, and it was actually crazy because they were saying that there were a bunch of state senators who had legislation that they already were working on, they were going to get passed. So there was a bunch of backroom deals. They took their name off the legislation. Obama put his name on the legislation. And then so when he ran, he could say, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did
Yes,
this, even though he wasn't in the policy making project. And when he ran for that seat, what people forget is Barack Obama ran against a conservative black man by the name of Alan Keyes. And
well,
so it was,
he's
yeah, it was, here's reasonable Harvard Barack Obama, and here's crazy screaming, you know, conservative Alan Keyes. So I was like, oh well, either way, we're getting, you know, a black guy. Let's go with the Harvard, you know,
yeah,
educated, you know, guy.
really,
And you know, so it was almost like the perfect timing of, you get to run against a record of this person, and you don't have a record yet, so nobody has anything to criticize and critique. You
right.
know, and so you get these flowery speeches about hope and change, and but
Yeah,
there's very little substance there. And so then you run against somebody like John McCain, you know, who was an American war hero at the time, but you can wrap him in his record. You know,
yeah,
every vote he ever did that was questionable, everything he ever said, you know, when he, I mean, after being tortured in Vietnam, he says some negative things about Japanese people, so you wrap him up in that without the
yeah.
context of, you know,
You
and
know,
so it was kind of a whole S show, you know, for lack of a better word.
I knew he had trouble with Obama when he stood up on election night here in Denver. This is where I had the convention was, but here in Denver, he said, we're a few weeks away from fundamentally changing our country. That I knew. Okay, we're in big trouble now because he's the president. And the problem is he has changed the country to a certain degree.
Yeah, yeah.
And he puts his proxy in there, Biden, and he's still running the show.
I knew something was going to be different, and I just kind of said, whatever happens, what I just kind of say when it comes to American public policy, which is I tell people you have to be very aware and careful with. No right lasts in America in perpetuity in that way. You have to
Yeah,
constantly fight for them. You have to sometimes physically fight, sometimes verbally. You have to work. You have to work to where you do it with, I say, an amount of decorum and decency, but you need to make the argument.
yeah,
And what I looked at was these are people that Obama has around him. There are people that he trusts. Whatever the goals are that they want to do is from a public policy perspective, they're open about it. You know what I mean? They've been writing about it for years, whether it was Saul Alinsky or what, you
oh,
kind of know what you're gonna get. So you have to push against it. And and then I started to look at, you know, some of the little policies that will come out, and I would say, well, there's a lot of executive orders that are happening, and but then from his left flank, they wanted to go further, and from the right, they wanted to halt, and so it was like the country, it is gonna swing. The Overton window is gonna keep swinging left and right. It's just at the end of the day,
what was
what
it?
did you get?
Darlington window
What did
you
you?
say?
Yeah, I say what the Overton window.
That's a Glenn Beck book.
Yeah, and so it's just
That
like
is
it's what did you gain and what did you lose?
right.
Especially if my presumptions are correct, where there are no solutions, there's just trade-offs. So
Yeah.
what did you get and what did you lose? So when it came to the healthcare thing, this is what I said. I said the government, for the first time in my knowledge, has forced you to buy a private good. Forced. And
Yes.
if you don't get the private good, it's okay. We'll just tax you. No big deal. But you just get taxed.
Yeah.
So a few years later, Trump is president, Biden is going to be coming in. The government now forces you to use some insurance with
Yeah.
with the COVID. So force you to have health insurance. Then the government forces you to use the health insurance. And so I said, so what are we going to get in 8 more years? What
Yeah.
else is the government going to force me to do now? At
No.
first I had the choice. If I get sick and I don't have health insurance, I knew that I had the possibility of getting sick.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was a risk,
Yeah.
and so the government says, no, you actually don't have the choice. You have to have health insurance. And I just said it was only a matter of time before the government forced me to use it. It was
Right.
only a matter of time. We didn't think that the government would be saying, no, 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 we're forcing you to use it by you having to take a vaccine and you can't make the decisions. Now whether people wanted the vaccine or not is irrelevant. It was the government saying, as a matter of fact, you don't have a choice. We would just close all your jobs.
Yep. And they
And,
did.
and, and then I thought the amazing reality of the government telling somebody you are not essential enough to feed your family. And a lot of people just sat back and they didn't do anything about it. And they had the mantra of public health. You sitting at home, we're just gonna bend the curve, all this
And pay
stuff.
you six
And
hundred dollars a week to sit around and do nothing.
and then the thing was, at that time I was still in the security field. So I'm going to work every day to protect these buildings that nobody's in. you know, and it was just eerie because it's government property.
Yeah.
And so it's eerie riding up the streets of the Commonwealth of Virginia and nobody's on the roads.
Yeah,
and all the businesses are closed. And I just thought this all started somewhere, you know,
yeah,
and whether we call it the institutionalization or the admin state, but that was the government flexing its raw power.
right.
And I was kind of shocked by how passive people just went along with it.
Yeah, it really shocked me too that we Americans, and I fought against it, but not a lot of people did around me. The people around me just, I had a couple around me who were with me, and we fought against it as well as two people can.
Mm,
But overall, they just went along with Fauci and President Obama and Bush, and
yeah, and that's when I started to, at least on this go round, I thought, well, I have to keep, doing these recordings
yeah,
because a lot of Americans know, I think instinctually something is wrong,
yeah,
something is off. I don't think that they know exactly where to point the finger, and I point the finger at the government,
I do too.
and I think the government, you know, is intelligent, and they get us to point the finger at each other.
Right, and that's the government's idea. As long as we're fighting each other, they can do what they want to do because we're not paying any attention to them. We're fighting our neighbors, who happens to
Yeah,
be liberal, or who happens to be a conservative. Anyway, opposite of what we are.
yeah, and I even remember, I went to work, and I don't work for them anymore, so I don't really care. But I was an account manager for a company called Allied Universal. It's a big national security company, or
Hmm.
multinational is actually now. And they put out a mandate. People need to get the vaccine and this and that. And
Well,
we
we can
stopped
fight.
them. Yeah, we were actually able to stop them because we just said we just won't go to work. Now what are you gonna do?
Yep,
And then they immediately came out. There was enough of us that caused a fuss, and and so they couldn't. It became untenable
well,
because
good for you.
they didn't have enough officers to pull it up to pull off watching, guarding the post, guarding the ships, guarding the this, guarding the that.
Yep,
But I remember watching and observing how everybody started to question each other. You know, are you this, or did you have the vaccine? Did you, and started to do this little? And I remember I walked into the facility one day, and somebody said, "Hey, did you get vaccinated?" And I said, "Mind your own business." And I just said, "In what world do you think it's appropriate to ask people private medical information?" And the guy was very liberal, and he said, "I actually never thought about it that way." I said, "Yeah, it's none of your business." I said, "Imagine me going up to your wife and asking her how many abortions have you had."
yeah,
It's none of my
same
business.
thing.
I was just like, whatever medical decision you decided to make for your life is not my business.
Well, when the first round of vaccinations came out, I was in a convalescent home. I injured my leg very badly, almost lost my leg, and I was in being rehabilitated, trying to learn how to walk again and
Mm.
function with a bum leg. And I had no choice. They just came around with the needle and said, "Bing."
Wow. See, and my thing was, I got out of the Navy in January of 2015. I hadn't taken any vaccines or anything since I left the military.
Yeah,
Not the
that's fine.
flu. And so it's not so much that I was anti or pro anything, but just that I normally just don't take medicine. When
Okay.
I'm sick, I'm just sick till I stop being sick. And and so I avoided the taking any shots, the booster, the this, to that, until sometime last year because I was traveling to Brazil.
Yeah,
And then so it was Brazil was saying, "Hey, you come here, you gotta, you gotta,
I had the
you got."
shot.
So then I felt like, all right, it was actually my choice. I want to go to Brazil,
Yeah,
so I'm gonna have to do it. So I went to my healthcare comes to the Department of Veterans Affairs. So I went there. So by that time, they had already sadly said what worked and what didn't work. And the
mhm,
doctor even told me, you know, this vaccine we were giving, the doctor told me a lot of veterans died from it
Yeah, I heard
because
the same thing.
they were saying, I forget what version it was, but I want to say it was Johnson and Johnson. Um, but she was saying that there was swelling that was going on in the heart, this myocarditis stuff, and they were having
Yeah,
a lot of heart problems in the studies. And I thought it's actually crazy because the veteran community is a perfect group because they're all getting their health care at one place.
yeah.
So you can
I
kind of watch and see. So she said, we no longer offer this one. You have to take this one. So
yeah.
I took the one shot, got the card so I could go to Brazil. And then
Yeah.
after I left Brazil, I never went and got any.
Well, I
And I'm
haven't gotten the latest rounds. Anyway,
yeah.
we're running near out of time. There's one question I've been wanting to ask you about. In the beginning of your bio on PodMac, you mentioned tribalism.
Yes.
What
Yeah.
are you? What do you mean by tribalism? I got an idea, but I want to let my listeners know.
So tribalism, I think what I mean by that is, and so it's independent media that won't lead you to tribalism. And I do think you have your perspective and that's fine. What I think ends up happening a lot is we start to listen to people that are in our own group, our own
Mhm.
circle. And that's when you get to your tribe. And you only can get information if it comes from your tribe. And I know what I'm saying is true. You know how I know it's true? Because I confirmed it with everybody else already in my group. And
Yeah.
it's and I just sit around and I look and I say, that is actually help poisoning the discourse because you won't even talk to somebody with a different opinion. You won't
Right.
even read you don't even have to have an actual conversation. You can just pick up a book of
Mhm.
somebody with a different opinion and just wrestle with the ideas. And then you may realize the thing that your tribe has been saying about that person may be wrong.
Yep. I've
You,
had
you know,
a couple of liberals on my shows over the last couple of years, and it's definitely different. I,
well, and I used to
we
be
had a
very
civil
partisan.
conversation. We had a civil
It,
conversation, like you and I. So he wasn't a fire breathing dragon.
yeah,
Let him
and I
have
think
another idea.
I think when you get to the meat and the potatoes, most Americans aren't that tribal. They are pulled into tribes. You
Hmm.
know,
Oh yeah. Well,
they didn't have concrete opinions about this thing or that thing. They turned to Rachel Maddow. She was screaming
oh,
about something. And then next thing you know, they were screaming about it. But they had no opinion on it one way or the other before they
yeah.
heard her say
Well,
it.
I have my
And
opinions of Rachel, so
and
but
so I think it can get that way with anything, whether it's our religion, whether it's our
yeah, it
politics,
can.
whether it's the foods we eat or don't eat. You start to come up with these narratives, and you
Hmm.
tribalize it, and that's what I wanted to avoid was like, how about I'm just going to tell you what they say. I'm going to tell you what they say, and you can make your own decision. And every now and then you can get my opinion about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I give my opinion quite frankly quite a bit on my show when I'm talking especially when I'm talking to the liberals, which I relish having a lib. I don't get many because I'm a conservative and it says so everywhere on my blogs and everything that I don't get many, but I relish getting them because I like to have my listeners get both sides of the coin.
Mm,
I want civil conversation. I'm not looking for yes men, and I say that in my opening, my when I do my uh, put it together, edit it and put it together. I put it there that I'm not looking for yes men. If you're a liberal and want to talk, contact me. Here's the email.
yeah, and I think if we have a lot more of that, it'll end a lot of the coarseness that happens in the
Yes,
country. And I get so frustrated when I think about, Americans viscerally hating other Americans.
yes.
And so I try to do my best to try to work that out. To we will never. Abraham Lincoln says that the house divided against itself cannot stand.
Right. House
And
divided
so
cannot stand. Oh, that's even in the
yeah,
Bible.
yeah, and so
That's a biblical
that's
quote.
And that's the way I look at it. I say we have to come to a place to where we can agree to disagree, and that just be it.
That's it.
Are we find some type of consensus? But if you are a Nikki Haley supporter and Nikki Haley wins, I can't be hyperventilating like my life is over. And
No,
and there's despair everywhere. And we
well,
have to and that's what I see. I saw all these pictures when Donald Trump won, everybody crying and everybody fainting, and then it was crazy because I thought it was so funny. But then when Trump didn't win the re-election, I looked and I saw everybody else just fainting and just
yeah,
outraged. I just said, growing up in Florida, it's very weird because it's where everybody goes to retire, right? So
right.
you have this melting pot of all these different viewpoints,
Hmm.
and I think I was better for it. But I said, but I remember even growing up in Florida, George Bush didn't win the election. He stole, he
Yeah,
stole the election.
Al Gore,
Okay.
yeah,
So then
yeah,
Obama gets elected. Obama didn't win the election. He stole the election. So then, Trump wins. Donald Trump stole the election. Russia. So then Biden wins. Joe Biden didn't. I just said, we
yeah,
do this a lot.
we do.
When is somebody just going to say, we put up a bad candidate, they made a bad argument, we
Yeah,
lost?
George, yeah. Anyway, we're
Eh,
out of time, Dale. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it as well. And you got the open invite. I'm going to send you an invite to come on to my show. We can
All
dig.
right,
I want to talk to you about some of your background, especially in your substance abuse counseling.
sure. You bet. I'll come on your show. Just send me a match on Podmatch, or you can send it to my email, which is host. I'll send you by text, not text, but by Podmatch, my email. It's easier because it's complicated.
All right.